Why, hello there. You made it. You're hanging out with Brandy, just waking up. Welcome aboard. I have something super cool to share with you guys. I have just finished the most incredible book for the third time. Ceres Colony Cavalier by Tony Rodriguez and edited by Andalaria and Jackie Kenner. This is a true account of one man's 20-year abduction. If you are new to the topics found in this book, or if you are an avid researcher, this is, you have to have this in your repertoire. Absolutely incredibly written, very easy to read. He has really given us quite a gem to reflect on. And in honor of him and in honor of the child that was taken from his home, I've put together what I'm going to call a visual book report. Hopefully, this is the first of many. Let's go. So it all starts when Tony is taken from his home in Michigan. He has taken on this wild abduction route, you guys, all over the place. So I put together a little map here of his abduction route. Here's where he goes when he leaves, or on the earth and the moon. When he leaves his home, he goes to an unknown medical facility in Kern, California, to the moon, Seattle, Washington, Peru. He even is taken to Mars. And then he goes to Ceres, which is in the asteroid belt called the Kuiper Belt. And from Ceres, he goes all over the place. He goes throughout the galaxy to include the Pleiades and several other unknown planets. He even makes a trip back here to Diego Garcia, which is a base here on Earth. So let's kind of start from the beginning. I wanted you guys to have a little visual of what this man, like where his little, what he experienced in all of the places he went to. So first, when he was taken from his home, he was picked up by three beings. There was a gray alien and two shorter reptilians. The gray alien was a mid-sized gray, and the reptilians had hoods. They took him to what he remembers being perhaps an underground medical facility. Basically, they were testing his DNA and seeing what his DNA was comprised of. From there, he goes to Inyokern. This is a small town with an airstrip. Here he was put into what he remembers being kind of like a very small hospital-like setting with other children. There was a doctor who observed and monitored them each day. The doctor believed them to be clones. These kids were put through these rigorous MK Ultra training, torture training, in order to gain mind control through trauma. It's a technology that's used by government agencies and the occult. Some of the things that these kids experience, their days, they would be drugged, they would be put into cages that ran electric shocks through it. They were suspended in swings with helmets that were playing these crazy pants movies, corrupt movies on repeat, all while sending an electric current through the helmet. They endured constant physical abuse, all kinds. Tony goes into detail, and then constant repair. So they were being abused and then repaired by this doctor. Uh, Tony Rodriguez and Tyler Kilwala from Journey to Truth, and they made a documentary, an independent documentary, where Tony returns to Inyokern and investigates and finds the locations that he remembers. His response to this, it was absolutely phenomenal. Like, it just really well done, just adding to the validity of his experience here. Side note, this is also, like, just a couple years later, this is also where Top Gun was filmed in Inyokern. Interesting. During Tony's stay in Inyokern, he actually makes a trip up to the moon. So on the moon, there's this trapezoid moon base shaped like the Pentagon. Many whistleblowers, super soldiers, and researchers and experiencers have reported on this base. I forgot to mention, Tony very specifically remembers taking a TR-3B from China Lake just outside of Inyukurn to the moon. While he was here, he experiences, well, first of all, he sees a different species of gray, a very tall species of gray. The same reptilians are here. They're conducting lots of tests, surgeries. They're giving him lots more drugs. These surgeries are somewhat, who knows, upgrades maybe, quote unquote, constantly being played these movies that were running scenes of fight or flight through these screens that were right in front of his face. Um, Basically, just lots of mental and physical manipulation. And then he goes back down to Inyukurn, and basically a repeat of the same treatments and abusive training. At some point, the doctor comes up. All of the details are in the book, you guys. Tony does a great job of describing and recalling what happened to him while he is here. From there, once they are approved for Theta Psychic Service, he is sent a military base in China Lake. There is an Air Force base. He takes an elevator and goes down to a train. So I'm bringing and pointing out this train because, again, this is something that several whistleblowers, experiencers, researchers have spoken of, this underground secret railway that is running all over the United States, and it running directly to military bases. So Tony is taken from here to Helena, Montana. He's picked up by a woman in a car and goes to Seattle. From there, he's privately owned by basically a pedophile billionaire, and he was kept in a dog kennel in a laundry room. Again, this isn't easy to read, but Tony does a great job of reflecting on his experience here. He was actually made to perform in these really odd satanic rituals, and they were given enforced intravenous drugs, and they were calling and invoking and manipulating multidimensional beings to manifest into Tony's body. At that point, these weirdo pants would gather information and power from this experience. It's all about power and control. From there, Tony is taken to Peru. He's taken to Tuantansuyo, I believe, Puerto Tuantansuyo, Peru. Tahuantinsuyo. And he's expected to do much of the same, basically use his psychic abilities. The treatment isn't quite as extreme here. Although he is kept in a room with food and cartoons, and there was an auntie or a grandma, I forget, and that just loved Tony and secretly brought him pastries. Every 3 weeks or so, Tony was pulled out on a plane and put onto a cot with IV drugs and served basically as this little oracle, giving warning for weather or federales and things like that. They were basically running cocaine and other cargo. Eventually, Tony lost his psychic abilities around 13. At that point, the villagers had really grown to love him, and so they used to call him the crazy boy from the moon, Loco Pequeño de la Luna, and they tried to collect money to purchase him. They were unable to do so, but gathered to wave goodbye as Tony flew off. From here, it's really sweet. Tony tells them this story, this part of the book is very sweet. You can tell that this part, like Tony feels love while he is here. You can see it in his interviews and in the book. It's just really well written and really sweet. So Tony has to return to Seattle. He's here for approximately 3 years, from 13 to 16 years old. There are other children that are there during this time. They come and go, but Tony is consistently there for this duration. They were given basically cups of pills, one egg, one piece of toast, and they were forced to do calisthenics each day. It's kind of a interesting life. However, each summer this guy would throw these crazy pants parties. There were hundreds of people. There were masquerade parties, and the children were presented to the guests to do with what they will. Throughout the party, there were cameras also, and they were capturing everything because there were upper echelon celebrities, politicians. All of this was caught on camera for blackmail purposes. This is a common tactic used. Like Tony at some point became allergic to the medications. When he could no longer take the medication, he woke up one day and someone was like putting a syringe in his neck, and the next thing you know, he's on the moon again. He was sold into military space corps as a slave. So here he undergoes further, more extensive surgeries on both on his limbs, his arms, and his legs. Again, there's these tall grays. Um, Kind of an intense experience. It's nonstop with these movies and this like almost like MK Ultra experience where they're playing these really then movies get more and more violent, fight, flight, fight, flight. And it's the concept is always, of course, stay and fight. At one point, there's a group of kids that are led down these long hallways and they're given these jumpsuits with these canisters. It's with these explosives in them, and they're pushed out onto a room with the sand floor and the doors closed behind them. These kids are huddled, and would you believe it? There's actually humans up in the rafters and they're yelling things down at the kids that are in this little space. And all of a sudden this giant ant-like being with tiger stripes, as Tony describes, comes around the corner. The kids are terrified. But at this point, they're implementing the training that they've seen or that they've experienced to date. And one of the children runs into the ant and blows himself up with the insectoid. So from here, the kids they or Tony is taken. There was a group of kids because he tells a story of when they first pull up, they have zero gravity and the kids are allowed to like float around in a shuttle. He remembers a shuttle from Mars to the moon, goes into great detail about each form of transportation that he recalls from getting from one point to another. If I don't mention it all here in this report, know that Tony does go into great detail because that's very fascinating. So there's two locations that Tony visits on Aries Prime. The first location he remembers has like these big color coded office cubes with cots. And at some point after their stay there, they were given these like low quality environmental suits. They had a gun with like that was actually magnetized, so you couldn't let go of it. It stayed stuck on his hand. And they were given these helmets that were open, and they were given these auto tourniquets. And he was sent out in these little units out into the terrain of Mars that they could breathe openly. And would you believe it? They were attacked by these insectoids. There was like these beetle-like insectoids that were 3 or 4 feet, if I remember correctly, and they were coming up behind him. They had giant pinchers and took out Tony's arm. So that happened. When Tony fell down, all of a sudden there was even another species of insectoid. However, this experience was much different. When this bug came up, this insectoid, it kept the beetle, the smaller insectoids at bay, and it touched Tony. And from there, Tony had a flash of memory that went all the way back to his life on Earth. I do not know if I've mentioned it, but to point up to this day, at some point, I believe probably when he went to the moon, Tony's memories were wiped. Multiple times through this experience, it is a technology, his memories are wiped, but not now. This beautiful creature causes him to remember being a little boy on Earth. And the bug looks at him and says, "That is who you are." It's a very profound experience. He allows Tony to live, not without losing a foot, of course. And Tony crawls to the base and re regrows. He regenerates his limbs and gets to experience this amazing purple sunset. You guys, this is so well written in the book. These slides may look campy. Okay, I understand, but he gives amazing details and has given several interviews talking about this experience. It's amazing. From there, he gets to go over to Aries Prime. So, Aries Prime, many people speak about it again. There, he's put through multiple aptitude tests. He remembers there being military personnel. It's a very fancy base and has really high ceilings and fountains and artwork and like an escalator. I forget the technology, but again, Tony goes into detail about all the cool tech that is there. When he's there, however, again, remember he is a slave that is owned by these militant space corps, and so he's going through all these aptitude tests. And he remembers a big room with seats and these screens that came down in front of him, constantly being dragged. These facilities, these training facilities, are run by Greys. They're constantly being tested. Tony ends up failing most all tests except for a skilled labor test. It's kind of comical the way that he tells the story. Um, Again, just excellent read. So from here, once he's approved for skilled labor, he thinks he's going onto a shuttle. But all of a sudden, this shuttle moves through a portal. It warps time and space. So this is not a TR-3B. This is not a standard third dimensional shuttle. This technology again actually warped time and space. Super cool. And then he lands in Ceres. Ceres is an asteroid in the Kuiper Belt. Actually, it's a planet. Oh, but actually, it is a civilization. There's a colony underneath the surface. But let me go back here because I want to point something out. Tony, in his book, recalls and describes, or he was there in 1988, and he remembers other people pointing out it was commonly known, like those are salt deposits. And he remembers people talking about it while he was in this craft looking down at the salt deposits. His story comes out and he's speaking publicly about these salt deposits in 2015, 2016. NASA reports that these are salt deposits on Ceres after Tony was speaking about it in his interviews. That's just really fascinating. Again, information to validate this man's story and his account of his experiences. This is what Ceres looks like from the outside. However, when Tony arrives there, there is a civilization under here, a German speaking, militant, corporatized civilization that exists under here. There are families under here. There are shopping. There's military bases. This is all underground. Tony is taken here. He is a slave. He actually has a collar on the entire time that he is here, but he ends up making a life for himself. He gets training, if you remember. And so he ends up working on a spaceship. Each night he comes home and he actually recalls some nights going out to a strip club. And the way that he tells the story and how he navigates even getting to the strip club compared to where he was sleeping is phenomenal. At one point he talks about multiple species. He even gets mugged by these species with like cat-like beings with military uniforms. Just really A great read. Okay, you have to read this. Yes, there are strip clubs up on Ceres, and Tony was there. Uh, excellent, excellent storytelling. I don't want to go into details, but we will interview him later and we'll ask him questions. That said, he was trained as skilled labor on this vessel. This is actually a submarine that was retrofitted into a spaceship. So Tony was working underneath, kind of in the belly of this, within there's like pipes and things. One day there was a catastrophic event. Tony almost lost his life, but ended up saving the ship. He gets promoted to this ship. Super cool, right? He describes it as a black like pumpkin seed with a flat that was flat on the back. His job was to maintain and assess cargo and fit it into the belly of this particular spaceship. This spaceship went on all kinds of runs all over the galaxy. They went to the Pleiades, they went to unknown planets. He remembers all kinds of species, and they even come back down to Earth. One of the places they land on Earth is a naval base in the Indian Ocean. We actually lease it from the Brits who kicked Indigenous out in 60 from 63 to 67. But we leased it in 67. Just before that, they literally kicked everybody out. But it's just interesting. Underneath here, there's a dome, which is a deep underground military base. There are many, many, many military personnel, whistleblowers, experiencers, and researchers that speak to these dumbs. On this occasion, Tony was hanging out. They were waiting to land. They were picking up cargo. And before landing, they hovered over Turtle Bay, and some of the shipmates got off and even went swimming in Turtle Bay. It's really cool. So this ship also goes to the Pleiades. Tony remembers in a jungle, I'm trying to remember correctly, there was a jungle like planet there where there were humanoid species. He said it reminded him of Mayans, perhaps the ones that had suddenly vanished thousands of years ago. Who knows? On this mission, no one was allowed to get off of the ship and interact with these Pleiades except for the women and certain empathetic or empath shipmates. So that was just kind of fascinating, very distinct. Tony also goes to a planet. He doesn't remember the planet, but he remembers it being swamp like. And he, with his own eyes, because he got off ship at this particular mission, saw this rat like species with military garb walking out and actually spoke with these Germanic officers that were running his ship. Remember, he's under control, always wearing a collar the entire time, and he is owned by this off world Germanic military operatives. Really intense. So, at the end of Tony's 20 years and back, he is going to the moon, has his memories wiped, but during this experience, he wants to remember because at this point he had had 20 years of experience in life that he remembers, friends, love. Just he does not want to have his memories wiped. That said, he is put right back into his body in southern Michigan. Tony goes on to live a normal life. He does remember, as a teenager, he does remember that he was taken and he does recall abductions, but he doesn't remember everything until he gets an MRI. At that point, it activates his brain and his nervous system, and his entire experience and memories. He has full recall of everything that had happened to him. It's really fascinating. And after this, Tony at some point becomes brave enough and comes and speaks about his memories and his experiences. He has interviews that you can actually find on his website, www.tonyrodrigues.com. Here you'll find several of his interviews. He also has Patreon group, and he has a super cool recall course. If you believe you may have had any type of experience that is similar, he has recall courses that are very activating and very helpful, to just for processing. Again, I can't recommend this book enough, you guys. This is an absolutely incredible and fascinating read. Tony is an incredible and fascinating human being. One of my favorite things that he said in one of these interviews, he says, I healed within the 40 years. So he felt as though he was entirely healed before being put back into his body as a little boy. Oh, are you wondering why it says 40 years? There's something I might have left out. At some point while on Ceres, Tony gets drafted into a second 20-year term. It's crazy pants, you guys. But he goes into detail. You learn all about it in his second book by Tony Rodrigues and Jackie Kenner. This is where his memories of being a gray alien that is responsible for creating stars. And it gets really deep. I hope I didn't just give too much. I think I've heard him say this in interviews, but this book is beautifully written. So the premise is that Tony is having memories of this additional 20-year experience as a star maker, and Jackie has memories that are paralleling some of his experiences. And the book is a collection of short stories representing their memories. And it's just weaving together this really beautiful read, very different than Ceres Colony Cavalier, and beautifully written. Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this visual book report for Ceres Colony Cavalier. It's been a blast hanging out. I hope you have the most amazing day. If I didn't mention, I am a galactic astrologer, and on our next interview, we'll be checking out Tony's fixed star alignments, because you guys, some of the species that he encounters in his book lie in his charts. We're going to have talk about it. Keep your eyes out within the next week or two for that interview. May the force be with you. I super love you.